That night in Paris, under the golden chandeliers and clinking champagne glasses, I knew something was off. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, that gnawing sense that something ugly was about to unfold. Dominic loved being the center of attention, and tonight was no exception. When he stood up and began talking about real businesses versus hobby projects, I knew he thought I would stay quiet, smiling politely while he dismantled my dreams. But not this time, not after everything. At first, I tried to laugh it off, pretending his words didn't pierce right through me. But inside, I cried in silence, the sting of betrayal hitting harder than I cared to admit. He didn't just mock Lucid Designs, he mocked me. He made it clear to everyone at that table that in his eyes, I was nothing to him, just a silly girl playing entrepreneur while the real men handled serious business. It was like being slapped with words in front of people I barely knew, and yet something happened that Dominic didn't expect. One of the guests, a sharply dressed man with a glint of knowing in his eyes, leaned back in his chair and watched me carefully. He never saw it coming, but I recognized that man instantly. Skylar Davidson, the elusive CEO who everyone whispered about, but rarely saw in public. And right then, the power dynamic shifted, even if no one else noticed yet. Skylar didn't say much at first. He just observed, letting Dominic dig his own grave with every smug comment about fragile little startups and wasted potential. I clutched my wine glass tighter, forcing myself to breathe, reminding myself my silence was my answer, for now. Little did Dominic know, the very person he was trying to impress had far more loyalty to me than he could ever imagine. I remembered the day I found the messages hidden in my late mother's belongings, letters, photographs, pieces of a life she had hidden from me to protect me. Skylar Davidson wasn't just a stranger, he was my biological father, a man who, without even knowing it, had been orbiting the same toxic world I was trying to escape. The truth came out in ways that would soon shake Dominic's empire to its core. Dominic kept going, laughing loudly as he told funny stories about how nobody believed her, meaning me, when I first pitched Lucid Designs. He even joked that I was good for throwing parties, not profits. He betrayed me in that moment, turning family into spectacle, loyalty into a punchline. But as I smiled through gritted teeth, a quiet fire ignited inside me. She planned it all, or at least she would from this night forward. After dessert, Skylar finally spoke, calmly, casually. He mentioned how impressive Lucid Design sounded, how he'd heard whispers of the brand disrupting luxury markets. The table went silent. Dominic's face froze. For the first time all evening, he realized the room wasn't laughing with him. It was staring at him. And oh, he broke me first. But now it was my turn to rise. I couldn't help but wonder, sitting there under all those flickering lights, how many other women had lived through stories of betrayal like this, minimized, mocked, silenced. But not anymore. I wasn't just some footnote in Dominic's success story. I was rewriting the entire narrative. She finally left the role he wrote for her, and the real story was just getting started. Dominic tried to recover, of course, cracking, forced jokes, raising his glass in a limp toast to the little dreamers. But the damage was done. That night, something inside me shifted permanently. I saw clearly, maybe for the first time, that the real revenge wasn't in yelling or crying or proving him wrong right there at the table. It was in building something so powerful that he could never touch it. And that's exactly what I decided to do. The seed was planted, watered with humiliation, betrayal, and fire. And just like that, the first cracks in Dominic Reynolds' perfect little world had begun to show. I wasn't just going to survive him. I was going to dismantle everything he thought made him untouchable. After that night, I couldn't stop replaying every second in my mind. The way Skylar had looked at me, the way Dominic's confidence had cracked ever so slightly. It was like watching a dam start to leak. He thought I would stay in my little corner, but deep down, I knew everything had changed. There was no going back. The truth came out in the most unexpected, almost poetic way, and it was only the beginning. Meeting Skylar in private for the first time was surreal. I mean, how do you even start a conversation like that? Hey, turns out you're my dad. Nice to meet you. Crazy, right? But when I looked into his eyes, something clicked. There was a warmth there, a kind of steady understanding. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And after living with Dominic's constant games, real felt like oxygen. Skylar told me he had no idea about me. I was deceived too, kept in the dark for most of my life because my mother thought it was safer that way. Turns out, my biological father had unknowingly become Dominic's top client, investing millions into the very empire that ridiculed his own daughter. She planned it all, life did, in a weird, twisted kind of way. And now, we had a choice. stay silent, or take control of the story. Over long conversations and quiet coffees in hidden Paris cafes, Skylar and I started to stitch together the broken pieces of our past. He wasn't trying to save me, he respected me. That meant everything. I wasn't just some charity case or a new pawn in someone else's game. I was a woman with fire in her veins, someone who had lived through stories of betrayal and still found a way to stand. Skylar admitted he had seen the way Dominic treated me that night. He said it reminded him of battles he thought he'd left behind. And sitting there, hearing that from someone who'd built empires, made me realize something important. My silence was my answer, but it didn't have to be my only weapon. Sometimes silence starts the war, but the truth wins it. We started planning, quietly, carefully. Skylar used his influence to open doors for Lucid Designs. Nothing obvious, nothing Dominic could trace. It was almost funny. While Dominic bragged about his dominance, the very lifelines his business depended on were slipping through his fingers. He never saw it coming, and honestly, neither did I at first. It felt almost too good to be true. Of course, doubt crept in late at night. There were moments when she cried in silence, wondering if revenge was even worth it. Wondering if healing and retaliation could ever live side by side. I didn't want to become cold and calculating like Dominic, but I also knew that letting betrayal fester inside me would eat me alive. It wasn't about destroying him. It was about reclaiming myself. Sometimes, life hands you the perfect storm, and all you can do is learn to sail. That's what this felt like. A brutal, beautiful storm of revelation, anger, and strange new hope. He broke me first, yes, but I wasn't staying broken. Not for anyone, not for Dominic. And definitely not for the part of myself that still wanted his approval. That part, I was learning to let her go. The bond with Skylar grew stronger with every meeting. It wasn't perfect, nothing real ever is, but it was honest. It was built on the truth came out, not on manipulations or half-promises. And slowly, I realized that the family I thought I lost had been replaced with something better. A partnership forged in pain, perseverance, and a little bit of righteous fire. As we finalized our first moves, Skylar leaned across the table and smiled, this knowing, almost mischievous smile. "Let's have some fun with this, kid," he said. And right then, I knew. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making sure that the ones who thought we'd stay small, silent, and broken would soon learn otherwise. Sometimes, the loudest revenge is the one carried out in complete silence. After that dinner, where he mocked me like I was a child playing pretend, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight him head on. No way. Instead, I'd let my results do all the talking. My silence was my answer. While he laughed and bragged, I worked tirelessly behind closed doors, building Lucid Designs one brick at a time. She cried in silence, but she built an empire in the dark. There were days I barely slept, nights when the weight of betrayal crushed my chest. I was deceived by people who should have believed in me. But here's the thing. When you hit rock bottom, there's only one way left to go: up. I found the messages where he plotted with Austin to block my connections. I could have exploded in anger, but instead, I smiled to myself and said, game on. Revenge tastes sweeter when you earn it through hard work. I started with partnerships. Dominic didn't even see coming. Volmont Leathers, a supplier he desperately needed for Reynolds Footwear's European expansion, became one of my closest allies. She planned it all. Every meeting, every handshake, every deal was a step toward freedom. I approached them humbly, honestly, and with a fire in my eyes no one could deny. And slowly but surely, they signed with me, leaving Dominic scrambling for alternatives. Building strength quietly isn't about hiding. It's about choosing your battles. You don't scream your plans from rooftops when betrayal is thick in the air. You move silently, like roots growing underground, preparing to break through the surface when the moment's right. He thought I would stay weak, paralyzed by his insults. He never saw it coming. How fast Lucid Designs would outpace the old ways he clung to. I'd show up to industry events, smiling politely, while underneath my calm exterior, strategies buzzed like electricity. I sat through his arrogant speeches, knowing full well he was about to lose everything he thought was secure. Oh, how many nights she cried in silence, and now those tears were turning into weapons he couldn't defend against. Every deal I closed was a brick added to the fortress I was building, a fortress he could never breach. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Dominic, looking uneasy as whispers about Lucid Designs started circulating. "Who's behind it?" they'd ask. Dominic would laugh it off, but inside, I could see doubt creeping into his mind. I wanted to scream, "It's me, the one you mocked." But I didn't. My silence was my answer. Because true revenge isn't shouting in anger. It's succeeding so quietly that your enemies realize they were the fools all along. The deeper I went into this journey, the more I realized how betrayal shapes you. It cuts you, scars you, but if you let it, it can also sharpen you into something unstoppable. Every time I remembered how he broke me first, how nobody believed her, I pushed harder. Betrayal became my fuel, not my chains. And trust me, once you understand that betrayal can be a ladder, you climb higher than you ever thought possible. I kept finding cracks in Dominic's empire. Suppliers unhappy with late payments, clients looking for fresh innovation, employees whispering about mismanagement. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting for someone bold enough to pull the thread. She exposed him not with a single blow, but with 1,000 tiny strategic cuts. That's how real power is built, not with drama, but with discipline. Still, there were moments when the loneliness gnawed at me. Building in silence means celebrating alone, mourning alone, doubting yourself alone. And yet, every lonely step was worth it, because revenge rooted in growth leaves a legacy, not just a scar. So I kept building, kept growing, kept strengthening my foundation, knowing the day would come when the truth came out and he would beg her to come back. But it would be too late. And just when I thought I had gathered enough strength to face whatever came next, life threw me a curveball I didn't see coming. A move so unexpected, it would turn all my plans upside down and force me to rethink everything I believed about betrayal, revenge, and trust. And it was like a game of chess. Every move I made, every partnership I secured, felt like it was a calculated step toward toppling Dominic's empire. I had started small, just little victories here and there, but it was all part of a bigger plan. I remember the first time I secured Volmont Leathers as a supplier. I had barely spoken to their team before, but there was something about their products that screamed class, and I knew Dominic was dying to get his hands on them for Reynolds, Footwear's European expansion. I could feel his desperation, and I used that to my advantage. It wasn't about making quick money. It was about positioning myself in a way that would hurt him the most. As I watched my business grow, it wasn't just the success that made me feel alive. It was knowing how much of a thorn I was becoming in Dominic's side. For the first time in my life, I was in control. No one could predict what I would do next. I was no longer that timid daughter-in-law who would quietly endure his mockery. Now, I was his worst nightmare, and he had no idea. Every time I secured a deal that he wanted, I could almost hear his frustration echoing in my head. And then there was Milan, the jewel in the crown of Dominic's expansion plans. When I found out he was bidding for a prime real estate spot in the city, I knew I had to make my move. I didn't need it for myself, but I couldn't let him have it either. I contacted the owner, and in a series of delicate meetings, I convinced them that Lucid Designs was the better long-term investment. It was subtle, almost unnoticed, but it was enough. By the time Dominic realized what had happened, the space was gone. It was like pulling the rug out from under him without even breaking. A sweat. But here's the thing. None of it was luck. This wasn't about chance or being in the right place at the right time. It was all about having a clear vision and never letting anyone see the full picture. Every time I made a move, I kept my intentions hidden, like a magician pulling off a trick no one could see. That's the art of revenge, isn't it? It's not about shouting from the rooftops. It's about quiet, strategic moves that hit where it hurts. By this point, Skylar and I were working so closely together that it almost felt like I had a partner I could trust completely. He was the one person who understood the gravity of what we were doing. He knew how much was at stake for me, how much I had to lose, and how much I had already sacrificed. There were moments when I would catch a glimpse of his face, and it would remind me of the father I had always longed for but never knew. We were in this together, and I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a solid foundation beneath me. As we destabilized Dominic's carefully laid plans, the pressure began to mount on him. The threats he had always used to control others didn't seem to work anymore. I could see his anxiety growing. Every phone call from his investors, every sudden meeting he had to rush off to, it all spoke of a man who was losing control. I was getting closer. The end game was near, and I could feel it in my bones, but I couldn't get too cocky. Not yet. We were playing a dangerous game. One wrong move, and it could all backfire. I had to keep my composure, stay focused. Every interaction, every deal, had to be perfectly timed, perfectly executed. I wasn't about to let Dominic take me down now, not after everything I had worked for. I had already sacrificed too much. Still, there were moments when I wondered what I had become. Was this really who I was now? The woman who had spent years playing a quiet game of revenge? Sometimes when I would sit in my office watching my company grow, I'd think back to those early days when I was just a young woman, desperate to be accepted into Dominic's world. How naive I had been. Now, the tables had turned, and I was the one who was in control. But at what cost? What was once a whispered conversation between Skylar and me had now turned into a full-blown strategy, and it was all beginning to pay off. But I couldn't get complacent. The final move was still to come. Dominic had no idea what was heading his way. The next phase would be the real test. It was time to show him who I had become, and he would never see it coming. There's a strange thing about power. It comes with a price. I thought I had prepared myself for the sacrifices I would have to make along the way, but nothing could have truly prepared me for what was coming. As Lucid Designs grew and I became more successful, my marriage to Austin began to slowly unravel. It wasn't that he was a bad person, far from it, but he had started to resemble his father in ways I couldn't ignore. He was no longer the man I had married. It was as if the more power I gained, the more I watched him slip away. The more I fought for my independence, the further he distanced himself from me. I still remember the night it all came to a head. We had dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one where we had celebrated our engagement just a few years earlier. The ambiance was the same. The laughter of the people around us felt familiar, but there was something in the air, an unspoken tension, thick enough to cut through. Austin was distracted, constantly checking his phone, talking about the business. It wasn't just the constant chatter about Reynolds Footwear, it was the way he spoke about it, with this unquestionable loyalty, like it was more important than anything else in the world. More important than me, more important than us. At that moment, I realized how much I had changed, and how much I had lost in the process. I had spent so much of my life hiding in the shadows, trying to fit into a world that never truly accepted me, and now, as I was finally breaking free, I was losing the very thing I had fought to protect. The pain of it was suffocating. I had worked so hard to build something of my own, but it came at the cost of the one person who had once meant everything to me. The man who had promised to stand by me, no matter what, had become just another cog in his father's machine. The more I built, the more I realized that power is a double-edged sword. You can gain the world, but lose your soul in the process. Austin had started to see me as a threat rather than a partner. He wanted me to be the submissive wife again, to be content with the life we had before all this ambition, but I couldn't go back. Not now. Not when I was so close to achieving what I had always dreamed of. It broke me. The man I loved had become a stranger, someone who no longer understood what I was doing or why it mattered. The more I fought for my independence, the more I felt him pulling away. It wasn't just his loyalty to his father's business. It was the way he couldn't see me as anything other than a wife and daughter-in-law in a world that didn't know what to do with me. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Here I was, conquering the world of business, stealing resources and opportunities from Dominic at every turn, but the one thing I couldn't control was the person closest to me. Austin had become just like his father, putting the business above everything else, above me, above us, and I couldn't be that woman anymore. I couldn't live in the shadow of someone else's expectations, not when I was finally finding my own light. As the cracks in our marriage grew wider, I started to realize something crucial. Some battles are fought on two fronts. You can fight for your dreams, but you also need to fight for the people you love. The problem is, sometimes your dreams and the people you love aren't on the same side, and when that happens, you're left with a choice I wasn't ready to make, a choice that would tear my world apart in ways I never imagined, could feel it in my gut, the guilt, the heartache. But I had worked too hard to get here. I couldn't let Austin's abandonment stop me now. I had come too far. It didn't matter how much it hurt. In the end, I knew that the choice was mine. It had to be. I wish I could say that it didn't hurt, that I was strong enough to push through it all without flinching. But that's the thing about personal costs. You never really realize how high the price is until you're forced to pay it. And by then, it's too late to turn back. But I wasn't going to turn back. I couldn't. Not when everything was finally falling into place. I had no idea what to expect that night. Paris. It had always been the city of dreams, the city where everything felt possible, the glamour, the lights, the endless possibilities. But on this night, Paris would become the backdrop for something much darker, something that would change everything. Dominic was there, of course, trying to bask in the glory of his company's achievements. But it wasn't just a celebration, it was a trap. And I wasn't the one who'd fall into it. The event was everything I had imagined it would be, yet nothing at all like I had expected. The grand ballroom of the Hôtel de Crillon glittered with chandeliers, the room filled with the chatter of Europe's elite, all in their designer clothes, celebrating the success of Reynolds Footwear. Dominic stood at the center, basking in the admiration of his peers. But there was something off about the way he held himself. The way he spoke to everyone, as if he was untouchable. It was the kind of arrogance that made my skin crawl. As I stood there, I could feel the weight of what was about to happen. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, but this time, I was ready. Skylar was by my side, and his presence grounded me. He had become a real ally, not just a father I had never known. We had been planning this moment for weeks, months really. The time had finally come to expose Dominic for who he truly was, to shatter the world he had built, and make sure he would never have the same control over me or anyone else again. Skylar was calm, collected, his eyes fixed on Dominic from across the room. He wasn't just there to support me, he was there to take back what was rightfully his. to expose the lies Dominic had been living for so long. And in that moment, as I watched, Skylar, I realized how much we had in common. We both had been victims of Dominic's manipulation in different ways. But now, together, we would bring him to his knees. The evening unfolded like a well-rehearsed play, and I had my role to play. Skylar and I exchanged glances, and with a simple nod, the show began. The guests were enjoying themselves, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Dominic was delivering his speech, gloating about his company's future, when Skylar made his move. He stood up, casually, and walked over to the center of the room. The gasps were immediate, the silence deafening as Skylar interrupted Dominic, mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, but I think it's time everyone knew the truth," he said, his voice smooth but filled with authority. Dominic's face turned pale, his arrogance faltering for the first time in years. "What are you talking about?" he sputtered, trying to regain control of the situation. But Skylar wasn't done. He turned to face the crowd, and that's when the truth came out. "You don't know me, but you all know my company. What you don't know is that the man you're all celebrating tonight, the man who's built his empire on the backs of others, has been hiding the truth from you all for years. This woman, Lucy," Skylar said, pointing directly at me, "is my daughter, and I've been quietly watching Dominic destroy everything she's worked for, until now." The shock was immediate, the room erupting in whispers, gasps of disbelief. It was like everything froze for a moment, Dominic standing there, speechless, while Skylar revealed the secret that had been hidden for so long. The truth that would not only ruin Dominic's reputation, but dismantle the empire he had so carefully built. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the life that had been taken from me. Dominic's face twisted in shock, and for the first time, he looked human. He had never seen it coming, and the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He tried to recover, to salvage what was left of his dignity, but the damage had already been done. The room was buzzing with excitement, disbelief, and a mix of emotions. As the truth unraveled in front of their eyes, he begged me. I could see it in his eyes. The desperation, the fear. He knew what was coming and he wanted to fix it, but it was too late. My silence had been my answer for far too long. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. The years of gaslighting, of pretending that I didn't matter, it was all coming to an end right here, in front of the people who had been so blinded by his charm. Skylar had already made the call, and within minutes, everything started to unfold. His withdrawal of tech support sent shockwaves through Reynolds' footwear. It was the beginning of the end, the start of Dominic's downfall, and as I stood there, watching it all unfold, I realized just how far I had come, how much I had endured, how much I had fought for this moment. But as the applause from the room rang out, and the cheers for Skylar began to echo in my ears, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point, a moment where the battle for my future had finally been won. And yet, it felt hollow. It felt like a part of me had been lost in the process. The war wasn't over, but this battle, it was mine. The following weeks felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. It was surreal to witness everything Dominic had built come crumbling down so quickly. He had spent decades cultivating his empire, and in just a matter of days, it was all falling apart. There's something strangely poetic about watching someone who thought they were untouchable realize just how fragile their world truly is. For the first time, I saw Dominic for what he truly was, a man built on lies, surrounded by people who had been manipulated into believing in his power. The media coverage was relentless. Every morning I would wake up to another news headline about Reynolds Footwear's financial mismanagement, about the harassment suits that were suddenly coming to light, about the explosive details of his betrayal of everyone who had ever trusted him. It was like the floodgates had opened, and once the truth had been exposed, there was no going back. His empire, the one he had fought so hard to protect, was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted. Dominic's public image, which had once been untouchable, was in ruins. His business partners started to pull out, one by one, citing a loss of confidence in his leadership. The investors who had once praised him as a genius now began to abandon him in droves. It felt like watching someone drown, gasping for air, but no one was willing to throw him a lifeline. He was sinking, and there was no way to stop it. For me, it was a bittersweet feeling. I had won the battle, yes, but the emotional toll was far more complex than I had imagined. I had watched my father-in-law, the man who had belittled me and mocked everything I stood for, be exposed for the fraud he truly was. But but the victory didn't feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like the closing of a chapter in a book I had never wanted to read. I knew it was coming. Deep down, I had always known that Dominic's downfall would be inevitable. People like him don't stay at the top forever, but what I hadn't prepared for was how much it would affect me. The people who had once been close to me, the ones who had supported Dominic in his rise to power, began to distance themselves. Friends, colleagues, even family members. Suddenly, it felt like I was alone in a world that had shifted beneath my feet. Skylar and I had made our move, but now the consequences of that move were hitting us both harder than we'd expected. The public fallout wasn't just about Dominic anymore. It was about everything that had been hidden for so long, about the lies that had been told to protect the man who had nearly destroyed my life, but it was also about the price I had paid for my silence. The years of suffering, of feeling small, of being invisible in a world that didn't care about my worth. And now, with the truth out in the open, I was finally able to breathe. I had been deceived for so long. I had allowed myself to believe that I was nothing to Dominic, that I didn't matter, that my voice didn't count. But now, as the walls of his empire fell, I could see it all so clearly. He never saw it coming, did he? He thought I would stay, that I would keep playing by his rules, that I would let him control me forever. But no, I wasn't his puppet anymore. And watching his empire collapse felt like the ultimate act of revenge. But there was a dark side to this victory. It wasn't just about the satisfaction of watching him suffer. It wasn't just about proving to everyone, including myself, that I had been right all along. There was a cost to this victory. It wasn't just about Dominic's downfall. It was about the loss of a future I had once imagined for myself, a future that didn't involve constant struggle or fighting for recognition. As his empire collapsed, the ripple effects were felt in every corner of the business world. People who had once been loyal to Dominic began to question their own choices. Those who had once supported his methods now began to second-guess their own morality. It was like watching a wave crash against a rock, eroding everything in its path. And in the midst of it all, I was left standing, a survivor of a battle I had never chosen but was forced to fight. I remember the moment when I realized that everything had changed. I was sitting in my office, watching the news on TV, when I saw Dominic's face flash across the screen. The man who had belittled me, who had tried to crush my dreams, was now a figure of ridicule. And for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a victory of any sort that I could celebrate. It was the end of something. A chapter closed, a door locked. And while I knew that the future still held challenges, it also held a glimmer of hope. The truth had come out, and for the first time in my life, I was free. You'd think winning would feel like fireworks, right? Like some grand parade marching through your chest. But when the dust finally settled and Dominic's empire crumbled at my feet, all I felt was empty. Betrayal doesn't just leave bruises on your heart, it guts you from the inside out. I had dreamed of this day, of the truth coming out, of him begging her to come back, of everyone seeing who he truly was. Yet, as the stories of betrayal spread and he faced the music, all I could hear was the echo of my own broken trust. There was a moment, sitting alone in my hotel room, where I stared out at the Eiffel Tower twinkling in the night and wondered, was it worth it? Sure, I had exposed him. She planned it all, piece by piece, and he never saw it coming. I showed him the proof, but part of me felt like I had lost something bigger than a battle. I had lost the version of myself who believed that loyalty could actually mean something. I realized, painfully, that revenge tastes a lot like ash when swallowed alone. Every now and then, I'd remember the night I found the messages, the night my hand shook so bad, I could barely hold my phone. He broke me first. No matter how fierce I acted at the boardroom table, no matter how I wore confidence like armor, inside, I was the girl who cried in silence. I was deceived, over and over again. And winning didn't erase that. It only made the wound look prettier from the outside. Dominic's downfall wasn't just public, it was spectacular. Financial records, harassment lawsuits, suppliers backing out. It was like watching a dam burst open. And still, my silence was my answer. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw his failures back in his face. I stood there, calm, poised, like someone who had nothing left to prove. Maybe that was my real revenge, showing the world that he betrayed me, but I refused to betray myself. People started calling me ruthless behind closed doors. Well, let them talk. They didn't know what it felt like when nobody believed her, when you had to stitch your dignity back together with nothing but sheer stubbornness and a shaky smile. They didn't know how hard it was to build something from scratch while he mocked every step you took. They didn't see the nights she cried in silence, mapping out every move while pretending to be fine. There were mornings I woke up and felt like I couldn't breathe. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the loneliness, pressed against my chest like a 100-pound stone. I kept thinking about how he thought I would stay, how he laughed when I first mentioned lucid designs, brushing me off, like a clueless child playing dress-up. Well, guess what? She finally left, and this time, she wasn't coming back. Austin's absence hit harder than I let on. He begged her to come back once the fallout began, but my heart had already closed. The door he thought would always be open. I was nothing to him when it mattered, and that's a lesson I'll carry with me forever. Love that demands you to be smaller isn't love at all. It's just another form of control dressed up in sweet words and broken promises. Funny thing is, in the middle of all the chaos, I found pieces of myself I didn't even know were missing. Tiny fragments of courage, defiance, ambition, things I buried for years just to keep the peace. Betrayal shattered the life I knew, but it also unearthed the woman I was always meant to be. She exposed him, yes, but more importantly, she saved herself. Victory came with a price tag nobody talks about. It wasn't champagne toasts and confetti. It was quiet dinners alone. It was rebuilding from scratch. It was forgiving myself for all the times I stayed too long, hoping he'd change. And just when I thought the final chapter had been written, life had one more unexpected twist waiting for me.